Mr. Chairman, colleagues, Russia associates itself with the statement made by Venezuelan Foreign Minister Ivan Gil on behalf of the group of friends. Defend the UN Charter. I support the call and would like to add the following as a country. Today, after many years of recess, the General Assembly, we have the opportunity to make a comprehensive assessment of the practice of unilateral coercive economic measures. The practice of Western countries not only violates the Charter of the United Nations and the entire world order stipulated in the Charter. However, human rights cooperation is on the road to international development. Practices that literally kill people, depriving them of what they need most. First, our opponents are trying to mix UN Security Council sanctions with illegal unilateral coercive measures. To steer the discussion away from an unpleasant topic, the Security Council's first sanctions are an auxiliary tool to deal with threats to international peace and security. Their implementation should be quantitative and targeted, time-bound, and take into account all humanitarian, social, economic, and human rights consequences. Sanctions individuals and Security Council sanctions regimes need to be regularly reviewed to ensure that they are consistent with the situation on the ground. The sustained recovery of the political environment must be accompanied by the relaxation and subsequent lifting of international restrictions. Abuse of this tool for the purpose of unfair competition and punishment of undesirable countries is unacceptable. It is unacceptable to supplement Security Council sanctions with unilateral restrictive measures, especially those of an extraterritorial nature. By bypassing the Security Council's unilateral adoption of our agenda today, let's emphasize the objects of the Western UPM. Become a country, implement independent foreign and domestic policies. This is how they sometimes respond to the independence of other models rather than colonial economic methods. The targets of the sanctioned companies are publicly announced: achieving financial technology isolation, undermining growth prospects, and damaging. The purpose is to destabilize the internal political environment and create prerequisites for power change and external control of sovereign resources. However, Western countries are trying to convince us that they are acting legally. They say they are only encouraging other countries to comply with their obligations under international law. Coercive measures are said to stem from our adversaries' own international obligations. We heard that today. In this regard, I would like to receive answers to a number of questions. First of all, who appointed you as a judge? Who, where, when, and to what extent did you perform your duties? I would like to remind you that according to the Charter of the United Nations, the right to take coercive measures has been terminated and is reserved only for the United Nations Security Council. And no international treaty stipulates that if the West believes that its status is violated by any country, Western countries give the PLA the right to abuse its status as a global financial hegemon and hinder the country's trade or seize its sovereign assets. Second, so what should the West do with its own breach of its obligations? The answer is obvious: it's not a violation. The position of states that take illegal unilateral coercive measures is summed up in the well-known Roman maximum, which is due to Jupiter, not for the bull. Hang Yuri non fox fighting. In other words, there is no legal basis. Only a rule-based order. The West is changing its interest. As mentioned earlier, unilateral measures are currently being taken against about 30 countries, with a total population of nearly 2 billion. As a result, more than a quarter of the world's population is illegally restricted from economic activities. The assessment of the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations Human Rights Commission on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights following her field visits to Cuba and Venezuela. The economic consequences of U.S. sanctions are spreading to millions of citizens in these countries. The right to health, adequate nutrition, and a decent life are adversely affected by the enjoyment of economic, social, political, and cultural rights. Children, women, and other vulnerable groups are disproportionately affected. The Special Rapporteur notes that sanctions have made it increasingly difficult and expensive for humanitarian organizations to provide assistance to affected populations who face delays or refusal to pay for the delivery of medical and food supplies. The humanitarian himself has confirmed this to us. They assured us that so-called humanitarian exemptions would not work. Not working due to secondary sanctions, effect of their extremely over-execution. The United States' attempt looks particularly disgusting. In addition to the embargo against Cuba, it is listed as an accomplice to terrorism, a country that, under the conditions of novel coronavirus, provides assistance to people in need around the world, sends medical teams and medicines, and mediates negotiations between the Colombian parties. We call on the United States to heed the unequivocal universal call to begin lifting the embargo against Cuba and removing Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Let us also mention Syria, which is suffering from the strangulation of Syrian natural resources by the United States occupying forces under the background of massive destruction, illegal unilateral sanctions, and theft. The normalization of the Assad regime's new inhumane sanctions bill by the United States is shocking. What is the case with its adoption? It will hit again mainly the citizens most in need. We are awaiting the special report of the United Nations on the impact of sanctions on humanitarian activities in Syria, which he promised. The use of economic pressure against Belarus, North Korea, Iran, Zimbabwe, Sudan, Eritrea, and other countries is a clear reason for claiming that unilateral illegal measures have long been indiscriminate weapons of mass destruction and pose a threat to international peace and security. We and other delegations will continue to actively raise the issue of this illegal activity. At the same time, the organizations of the United Nations system themselves are timid in talking about this. We stress once again the importance of greater United Nations involvement in accordance with existing General Assembly resolutions. Monitoring the negative effects of illegal unilateral measures. It is the direct responsibility of the Secretary General of the United Nations to prepare such reviews, whether Western donors like them or not. The father of the United Nations Resident Coordinator system this year, in accordance with General Assembly resolutions, unilateral coercive measures as a means of political and economic coercion against developing countries. 78-135. In addition, we would like to draw attention to the fact that the United States passed a law in April that laid the groundwork for the seizure, confiscation, and transfer of the sovereign assets of the Russian Central Bank. This law seriously violates the principles of international law concerning the immunity of states and their property, not to mention the principles of the sovereign equality of states and non-interference in their internal affairs enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. The actions of the United States and its allies set a dangerous precedent in which no country's assets will be protected from illegal expropriation. Every country should think twice before deciding whether to keep its assets in the United States or its satellites. We call on all responsible members of the international community to oppose this illegal act, refrain from supporting or acquiescing in it, and avoid complicity in these violations. In cases of asset confiscation, we will be guided by the right to retaliation. Generally speaking, they emphasize that trying to maintain the escaping hegemony of Western countries is based on unfair competition. Green barriers clamp effective forms, technology spillovers, and investment. Other new walls are our opponents' most destructive choices. What do the people of these countries already estimate? The illegal and uncontrolled economic pressure of Western countries determines that it is necessary to strengthen joint countermeasures against such measures. Consolidate around a new global model based on bone polycentrism, equality, and mutual respect. These topics were discussed during the recently concluded St. Petersburg International Economic Forum and the recent BRICS foreign ministers meeting held in China. The theme of the forum is the core foundation of multipolarization and new growth points. It is the development of innovative economic cooperation among the countries of the South that will make the sanctioned countries such growth points and get rid of the burden of restrictions. More specifically, elements of a new financial system and architecture independent of the dollar and linked to payment infrastructure are already emerging. The transition to domestic currency settlement is taking place in promising formats such as the EU, the BRICS countries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and ASEAN. Other solutions are also being developed to reduce dependence on those who use their economic dominance as weapons and are willing to actively participate in such work to build bridges rather than walls. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.